Well, this video is definitely going to need a spoiler warning. Baldur's Gate 3 continues to be one of my favorite games I've ever played, and while I could go on for hours about the countless features and aspects I adore, you know what you're here for. We're all about the lore, which this game does very well, except when they randomly decide to make the Emperor Balduran. Okay, let's back up a bit. Yes, I think Larian did an amazing job of integrating yet another entry of their Baldur's Gate franchise into the expansive and ever-changing world of Dungeons & Dragons, but there was one narrative choice they made which I don't think quite works when it comes to the timeline of Faerun's historical events. Welcome to Figuring Out Fantasy, where today we'll be going over the second big plot twist thrown at us when it comes to our tentacle friend over here, the fact that he's the legendary adventurer and founder of Baldur's Gate, Balduran. Though while I'm typically highlighting my favorite moments we can find within the game on this channel, this time I'm going to be a bit critical, as we dig into not only why this twist just doesn't work, but how Baldur's Gate 3 tried and failed to retcon the most notorious man on the Sword Coast in an attempt to make it fit. Make sure to leave a like if you end up enjoying the video, and don't forget to comment your thoughts on this controversial moment, as there's certainly a lot to discuss. Now let's get into it. Before we start on the specifics, let's frame this twist first so we know what we're dealing with. I just did an in-depth video on the Wormway which leads up to this moment, and the most popular video on this channel covers the entirety of the Emperor's narrative throughout the acts. So if you want the most context, maybe give those a watch first and come back to go over this moment with a fresher memory. But you'll get the full gist in this video regardless, so let's begin with the daunting approach towards the seemingly dead corpse of Ansur, the heart of Baldur's Gate. So far, we're walking into the innermost sanctum of the Wormway with anticipation of awakening who's meant to be the savior of the city. Entering Act 3, the threat of the Absolute is more potent than ever before, and it's left the citizens to feel as if there were a dark cloud looming over them as they try to live their lives. So to learn that there was indeed a potential way out of this mess which felt like a rather hopeless situation to begin with, it was a no-brainer that our priority was to uncover the secrets of the Wormway and approach the legendary worm in hopes of help. But I don't think that we were expecting that what would take place down here would shake the very foundation of the Sword Coast fabled history. In an abrupt moment, lightning strikes the ground in front of us, and the presumed dead husk of Ansur will start to piece itself back together in front of our very eyes. But while we're coming down here in good faith with intentions of saving the very city which this dragon is named after, we now find ourselves captured by his spirit, with our hopes of fighting alongside him quickly fleeting as the situation begins to feel more and more dire. Though while we're truly helpless in this moment, there's a sense of relief as we find out it isn't us who struck a nerve with the worm, and the Emperor will stir within the astral prism before presenting himself. And here is where the big drop happens. Ansur will address the individual we've been through nearly everything with as none other than Balduran, and we really don't have much capacity to digest the absolute bombshell as the two proceed to have a rather heated discussion about a history we know nothing of. They don't address the implications of what this means for somebody like us, as they're simply having this conversation between themselves, two individuals who have all the context and emotions of what occurred so many years ago. Information we can't truly interpret yet, as it flies in the face of everything we thought we knew, were deceived about, and then learned again about this tentacle freak. But once we're forced into combat with who we thought would help us save the city, there's no turning back, and we'll have to fight on behalf of Balduran yet again. Once we emerge victorious though, we'll get a chance to let the one who can't seem to tell the truth to save his life attempt to explain himself, but not before wincing at the final words of Ansur as his undead body loses life once more.
Balduran, what have you done?
What's presented here will unfortunately prove to invalidate everything that was just revealed to us as a big plot twist, since it just doesn't work. The Emperor is clearly aware that we want some answers, and will offer to lay out the true nature about his troubled path to becoming a mind flayer. When we bring up the fact that he's Balduran, he won't deny it, but instead he will say that he's now much, much more. And when we ask to hear about the rest of his past, he'll point out how sentimental of an approach we have. Really emphasizes just how empty mind flayers truly are. They seem to lack emotions, but are capable of perceiving when they might be applied, and point it out in an almost robotic way. Ugh. And honestly, for that reason, I think I have to address him going forward only as the Emperor, as while he was once Balduran, there's truly no trace of the man he once was, apart from the memories he carries. He begins by emphasizing that the origin of his story hadn't been a lie. He was indeed an adventurer, but this time he doesn't claim that he was from Baldur's Gate. He reveals that he was a captain of the Wandering Eye, and that his very crew acquired enough gold to found Baldur's Gate so long ago. Sitting and watching his glorious city grow and prosper was a joy in and of itself, but he claims that it wasn't enough. The sea called to him, and he ran to her with open arms. He'll talk about a troubling storm wiping out his crew and destroying his ship, and after covering his pursuit to discover Moonrise Towers for the supposed treasure it possessed, he'll reiterate that he was indeed captured by mind flayers underneath the Selunite landmark and afflicted with an illithid tadpole, transforming into one of them, much unlike how our course of events have gone alongside the astral prism. But the biggest discrepancy that he reveals here is that he hadn't broken free from the absolute of his own will like he mentioned prior. It was actually Ansur who found him, Ansur who pulled him from the Elder Brain's domination, and Ansur who brought him home to Baldur's Gate. The Heart of the Gate called upon any and every healer he could get a hold of, the Emperor saying how he nearly broke his spirit in the attempt. But here's where the disagreements began. The Emperor said that Ansur didn't understand. He wanted no healing. He was not sick. When we ask him if he feels bad about killing the one who saved him, he'll recall that Balduran did without a doubt, especially because his savior was Ansur. Their disagreements would eventually reach a climax where, after countless attempts to rebel against what he felt to be a horrible sickness, Ansur would find himself approaching Balduran's bedside looking to end the life of his friend who he couldn't get through to. But in a twist of fate, the Dragonborn would fall instead as Balduran fought to preserve his own life, leaving neither of the two founders of Baldur's Gate alive after everything. Ansur slain by his best friend, and Balduran being essentially dead, winding up as a mind flayer who has no real humanity left to speak of. So the Emperor would go on to run the city of Baldur's Gate through the Knights of the Shield, and kept to a secret of life while operating from the shadows. Alright, that was tough to get through while holding my tongue. It's honestly a compelling story, though I can't help but cringe a bit at the amount of hoops they jumped through in order to try and make this work. To start, the city was founded 400 years prior to the events of Baldur's Gate 3, and he doesn't bring it up in detail here, but the voyage that allowed him to found Baldur's Gate was one to a mysterious island known as Ankarom, where there was enough spoils to fund the small origin of the now glorious city on their return. This particular journey isn't exactly important itself, but according to history, the moment in time that the Emperor describes as the sea calling out to Balduran once more was for yet another venture towards the islands of Ankarom, but it was this specific voyage on which he was never seen again. And when did this trip to Ankarom take place? In the mid-1000s DR, the same century which Baldur's Gate was founded, and still 400 years before the events of this game. Why is this a problem? Because this would put the story that the Emperor tells us in that exact same time frame. And that's its own can of worms for three main issues. 1, no Mind Flayer can live for 400 plus years. 2, if Ansur also died around that time, his corpse would not still be intact in the Wormway for us to discover, also making the Wormway's mission confusing. And 3, Moonrise wasn't built until at the earliest 1300s DR, but he tells us that he was in pursuit of the Selûnite landmark during the same time period where he shipwrecked on this voyage. If Balduran's transformation into the Emperor doesn't fit with the timeline here, it would make nearly all of what is told here lose credibility. So let's dissect the first discrepancy. The way the Emperor tells of his illithid tadpole affliction, it happened soon after he was washed ashore and lost his crew. So if this was the case, he would be at least a 400-year-old Mind Flayer as he stands before us, which exceeds the typical lifespan of a Mind Flayer by about 250 years. Well, that's quite the goof. An entire 250-year discrepancy? Now, I've heard many of you in the comments of previous videos describe the Emperor as an Illithirid, which I may or may not agree with. But for the sake of this argument, let's just say he was an Illithirid, who have quite a bit longer lifespans than the average Mind Flayer, which is typically 120 years or so as it is. They'd still be 150 years off, as an Illithirid only has a lifespan of about 250 years on average. I don't really know how this happened. Baldur's Gate 3 also apparently made Balduran an elf as a retcon for this game, which I guess I can imagine was in an effort to make this entire twist work. Honestly, if he was an elf, there would be a combination of the lifespans between an elf and a Mind Flayer compared to a human and a Mind Flayer that could very easily bridge the gap over 400 years. But that doesn't change the fact that he approached the Mind Flayer colony under Moonrise in the mid-1000s DR, and when he was transformed, would have taken on a Mind Flayer's lifespan, and left that of an elf's behind according to the physiology of Mind Flayers. Kind of ironic how he tells of himself being so much more than he previously was, when he would have lived maybe another 500 years or so if he was still an elf. This on its own could be enough to frustrate longtime fans of the history throughout Faerun. But I mentioned there was a second issue here, so let's dig into that one as well, as it relates a bit more to Ansur's side of things than just the implications about the Emperor. If we can conclude that the voyage the Emperor speaks of did in fact happen in the mid-1000s DR, and that Ansur rescued him not long after, it would make his subsequent death at the hands of the Emperor leave him supposedly deep in the Wormway for over 400 years. Now, he's not in the best shape when we approach his dead body by any means, but there would be nothing left of the Roaring Storm if we were following a true timeline. I know Ansur is a special little dragon, but I don't know what would be preserving his body for so long down here. Maybe the will of his spirit? He did reanimate himself to begin with, so maybe he's got something that was keeping him intact all this time. But I don't really buy it, and it sucks because it makes the contents of the Wormway so much more confusing. It's one of my favorite areas in the game, but all of these revelations about Balduran bring up more questions than the dungeon has answers. The whole sequence was guided by statues of Balduran enchanted with magic mouth, giving them the capability of repeating messages recorded by whoever cast the spell, in this case supposedly Balduran. But if the point was to guide the aspiring champion towards the worm who slumbers within, that doesn't even line up, since the only reason Ansur would be down here to begin with would be if it was a resting place for his corpse once he was killed by the Emperor. Plus, how would he record these messages in the voice of Balduran when he would have been well along his Mind Flayer transformation by this point? Balduran is framed as if he truly hopes that a worthy champion could awaken Ansur, but with all of the inconsistencies in play, it's hard to take anything said by his statue seriously when their origins are so implausible to begin with. Now let's finish off the biggest blemishes on this narrative by talking about what it would mean for Moonrise Towers if we were to take these reveals for face value. As if you thought the preservation of Ansur was perplexing, wait till you get a load of this. The previous issues have their own disappointment when it comes to consistency, but what if I told you that Moonrise Towers wasn't even built yet when he was supposedly seeking it out for treasure? Yeah, this structure shouldn't be here. We know quite a bit about Moonrise Towers through our interactions with Ketheric Thorm and the various characters spread throughout its halls. More specifically, we might have learned that an individual named Morfred had been commissioned by the general himself while he was still a follower of Selûne together with his wife and daughter. When was this? Mid-1300s DR. I mean, what is going on here? Even if Moonrise had been built so long ago and it was still in the condition we see in the flashback, I can't find it likely that there would have been a Mind Flayer colony festering underneath the extremely dedicated followers of Selûne undetected. The worshipping of gods at the time like Selûne and Shar was far too serious for something so nefarious to be happening under their noses. There's just so much that needs to be accepted for this twist to work the way they're framing it. If you don't know the intricate details of what truly happened to Balduran so long ago, and why he realistically couldn't have landed himself accompanying us as a Mind Flayer in this time period, I don't doubt that this moment was an absolute jaw-dropper, as it actually does frame the importance and notoriety of Balduran as the founder of Baldur's Gate rather well, and props up the pursuit of awakening his slumbering companion in a way that fills us with thrilling anticipation. So maybe if we ignore the details they might have gotten wrong and just take the twist for what it is without any grander context, the quality of its epicness within the story that we're a part of might just be solid enough to enjoy it regardless. Now, this is all retroactive information, but with all of the looming questions we have about not only the world around us, but the shady companion we've been with since Act 1 as well, what is presented here does a really good job of relaying the emotional weight of betrayal. He had invested so much effort into pulling his dear friend from the clutches of the Absolute and subsequently attempting to cure him at any cost, that when it's revealed how Ansur approached the Emperor's bedside in hopes of bestowing a mercy killing, we almost interpret the entirely reasonable reaction for survival out of the Emperor when he retaliated and slayed Ansur instead as perhaps unreasonable, giving us the perception that perhaps the Mind Flayer should have allowed Ansur to kill him, knowing how far he's drifted from resembling the legendary adventurer he once was. It works so well because of how skeptical we've been of the Emperor this entire time. Any excuse we can try and get to pin him as somebody with ulterior motives we'll take. But the discussion afterwards, along with the note found on Ansur's dead body, gives us a bit more realistic perspective on the circumstances. And while we understand that there's very well a chance that we're being lied to yet again, the Emperor seems to be recalling vivid memories of Balduran and explaining them from his prior life's perspective. He felt Ansur's grief as the Dragonborn approached his bedside, and the moment was simply a culmination of neither side being in sync on the matter. Ansur wanted to cure his friend but didn't understand his new perspective, and the Emperor wanted to attain a higher power but couldn't convey that new perspective effectively enough. So if Ansur was going to take such a drastic action on his own accord, be it mercy or not, the Emperor had no choice but to take on a survivalist mindset. Hell, how easy could you really find it to give in that kind of moment? You know how the situation looks in the eyes of the individual who can't understand you, yet they're still taking such intense measures. Honestly, this is a gripping narrative to say the least, but it feels like Baldur's Gate 3 undermines its own reveal in a way. They put in all this effort to build a twist that was stocked to the brim with rich, emotionally moving material, but couldn't make things line up to where that expertly crafted narrative wasn't just full of holes from start to finish. It's moments like these that truly show how ambitious of a game like Baldur's Gate 3 can be, trying to blend an epic new story with the continuity of the already existing Dungeons & Dragons lore can make that ambition stick out like a sore thumb when they don't get the necessary facts right. At the end of the day, this twist is both a highlight and a hiccup on Baldur's Gate 3. On one hand, it adds depth and intrigue to the Emperor's story, framing Balduran's relationship with Ansur and the city he founded as deeply tragic in nature, but on the other hand, it strains the game's credibility by bending the established lore of Faerun past its breaking point. Maybe this twist is Larian's way of carving their own mark on the history of Baldur's Gate, or maybe they just dropped the ball. What do you think? Did this reveal work for you despite the inconsistencies, or do you think it's too much of a stretch? Let me know in the comments. And hey, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into Baldur's Gate 3 and beyond. Until next time, stay curious and keep figuring out fantasy.